I'm delighted to see so many of you this fine Monday lunchtime. Thank you all for coming. And particularly thank Parmy Olson for coming to talk about her amazing and really quite gripping book, Supremacy, about the AI wars. We're here to talk about the book, but also everything that's going on, because it's been 6 months since this book came out, and Parmy and I were just talking, and so much has happened since then. So there'll be quite a lot more. For those of you who've already read the book, there'll be the makings of the next edition at this very session. So for those of you who are coming back to book club, welcome back. For those of you who are new, my name is Neil Bennett. I'm the Chief Executive of H Advisors, and this whole book club thing is originally my crazy idea. I will chat to Parmy for about 30 minutes or so and ask us some questions, and then we'll throw it open to all of you. And really, I hope you come armed with questions, because it's such a huge subject. We will not have time to cover it in the 45 or 50 minutes that we have, and we'll barely even scratch it, but it'll be a good scratch. I'm particularly pleased that we're doing this. If you look out of your window and just round the corner, you will see the headquarters of Google's DeepMind. So this is a location book club, which is a bit of a first for us. But so let me turn to Parmy. But before I do, I just want a quick show of hands. This is an interactive session. How many of you have used or are using AI tools in your work or personal life, either knowingly or unknowingly? Great. So I would say that's a significant majority of people here. So that does away with my first question. Actually, I'm going to ask it anyway. It's a term that is thrown around on the news every day, but in just a few words, Parmy, explain what we should understand by the term AI and also AGI, because you go on to that in your book, please.
Yeah. Okay, well, I would start by saying artificial intelligence is perhaps the greatest marketing term of all time, because so many companies have used it to generate hype about a particular product, which maybe doesn't use the fundamental technologies that you might describe as being artificial intelligence. I've seen companies that use humans and say that it's AI, or that use classical software and say that it's AI. But AI, as it's sort of commonly known, refers to a process of training machines on data so that they can then learn. That's why you have the phrase machine learning. Learn to do the sort of cognitive processing that we as humans can do. And in the past, for the last 10, 20 years, when people talked about AI, they were talking about algorithms that could predict things or process data or summarize data. And then something really crazy happened 2 years ago with the release of ChatGPT, which was the start of the generative AI boom. And this was AI that didn't just process information, but could produce information. It could generate photorealistic images. It could generate very human-like, fluent prose in whatever style you wanted. It could be creative. It could show empathy. This is, I think, one of the really surprising things about what we see as AI today. If you think about how AI has been depicted in science fiction for many years, we see kind of these stilted robots that are a little bit kind of strange and robotic, but actually people are falling in love with AI chatbots today, real people in this country, in the US, across the world, because they are so good at mimicking empathy and mimicking compassion, which I think is really not what we were collectively expecting as humans.
We'll come back. We'll come back to that very quickly. But it starts with the people, doesn't it? Your book starts with the people, and AI, while it's a machine, starts with the people. Tell us a bit more about the two protagonists in your book, Sam Altman and Dennis Hassabis, and the companies they created.
Right. So Sam Altman is the founder and co-founder and CEO of OpenAI. Demis Hassabis, co-founder and CEO of DeepMind, now Google DeepMind, or GDM, as they refer to it internally. And yeah, I wanted to make this a book about people. I've read artificial intelligence books before. They can be a little dry when it's about the technology. And I've always, as a business journalist, I've always written about people, and they're fascinating to me, particularly technologists, because they are literally living in the future. And that is what Sam and Demis both had in common, which is that they wanted to build artificial general intelligence. We defined AI earlier, or tried to, and AGI refers to this theoretical threshold where AI or computers surpass our own cognitive abilities. They become smarter and more capable than us as humans. And that might actually seem a little bit scary or a bit strange to think about, but for Demis Hassabis, who was really the first in this game, he believed if he could build AGI, he could solve all manner of intractable human problems. In interviews, he's talked about curing cancer, solving climate change, because he would create this software that would just be like a super intelligence that could figure out all the kind of avenues that we have missed in our own efforts. So he started DeepMind in 2010, and then 5 years later, Sam Altman came along and he started OpenAI. With the same goal to create AGI, except he wasn't talking about curing cancer and solving climate change. He talked about abundance. That's a word he uses a lot. And he means, as far as I understand, creating an abundance of wealth. So if we have AGI, there will be trillions of dollars of new wealth just created, and everyone will just be happier. No one ever actually explains how that's going to work, but we'll get to that.
Well, we'll come on. We may come on to that. We'll certainly come on to their altruism and what happened next. But one of the things reading the book is I was really struck by the similarities between the two men. Both misfits as children and adolescents, both games fanatics, both marked by really very public early failure. Did that strike you as you were as you were writing?
Absolutely. It's a great summary. They're both very different in their own ways. Demis kind of took the science route in his career. He got a PhD in neuroscience, and he's kind of got a scientific mind. He's also quite spiritual in a lot of ways. Sam is really like an entrepreneur, like through and through, and quite charismatic. They're both charismatic. But they both had very similar upbringings, as you say. Demis was a chess champion at the age of 13. He was ranked number 2 in the world on the junior level. But both also, one thing I found interesting, I was just thinking about this recently, they both wanted to be close to power, even at a young age. So I was interviewing Sam Altman's high school principal, what we would call the headmaster here in the US is the high school principal. And he was saying that Sam would just come into his office all the time just to complain about some issue for the student body, or just to talk about how things could be better. And it was really unusual because most students didn't feel that comfortable being with authority, whereas Sam gravitated towards it. And Demis also, if you have any, I don't know if anyone here has ever played the video game Theme Park, but this was a very popular computer game in the 90s, and Demis helped create it when he was a teenager, but he worked with Peter Molyneux, who was the head of Bullfrog Productions, which was a big game studio. He's one of the icons of British computer games. He was a visionary, and Demis was working alongside him as a teenager to build this video game. So both of them had this inkling for power, and they both also had this kind of messiah complex, I think, that you throw that word around a lot, particularly when we talk about the visionaries of Silicon Valley. But think about the ambitions they both had, how galactically big they were. We're going to create AGI. What some people refer to AGI as humankind's last invention, because when you invent AGI, you don't need to invent anything anymore. And that's literally what they were trying to build.
Well, the machine will do it for you,
Exactly.
mean? Yeah, exactly. But, and the other thing that I suppose they have in common is they both started from an altruistic point of view and were captured by big tech. Is that fair, or is that a bit harsh?
I think that basically encapsulates it all in, like, we can all go home now, because it's just like you've encapsulated the whole book. They started off altruistically, and then they were captured by big tech. You're right. So they had these, and you hear this a lot in Silicon Valley. There's a phrase for it: mission drift. There's a lot of tech entrepreneurs, especially, who, I'm gonna build this app. It's a SaaS enterprise app. It's a widget, but it's still gonna make the world a better place somehow. But then, these they need to make a profit for their shareholders or for their investors, and reality hits and they kind of drift away from that. And I think that's to simplify it, that's what happened with Dennis and with Sam. They both started these companies with such high hopes and high dreams. And building AI is incredibly expensive. And so to get to where they wanted to get to, they couldn't get the money they needed from venture capital investors. They needed big money, and the only people who had that were the big tech companies, who were some of the best resourced organizations in the world today. So we can talk about how that happened. I mean, I have to say, one of the reasons I wrote this book is, and I wouldn't have written this book if this hadn't happened. I think it was during COVID or maybe after, I can't remember. I was sitting in a cafe with a former scientist from DeepMind. It wasn't around here, it was like somewhere else in London. And he was working for another company by then. And he dropped this crazy anecdote, which was that, he said, a few years ago, all of us at the company got put on a plane and we flew up to Scotland to this hotel for a company retreat. And Demis and the other founders stood in front of us and they said, we've got great news for you guys. We're breaking away from Google. And everyone got really excited because a lot of the computer scientists and AI scientists at DeepMind at the time they felt conflicted because they wanted to build AI to help make the world a better place and cure cancer, but they were working for the world's largest advertising company, AKA Google, who had other motivations in mind. And so DeepMind had always acted very independently from Google, but they knew they were still part of it. And so this felt to them like, oh, now we're actually going to break away. And the plan was DeepMind was going to become what they called a general interest corporation. This was this new phrase that they came up with after talking to lots of lawyers who'd made lots of documents, and after negotiating with Google for a number of years to break away. And they even got an agreement from Google, this is what I heard from a very well-placed source, that they could break away, they could be independent, and Google would provide them with $15 billion in funding as an endowment over 10 years to operate independently, which sounds crazy when you think about it, because Google had also spent $650 million buying DeepMind in 2015. So why would they want to do that? Well, because Demis had a really good relationship with Larry Page, who was the former CEO, and they felt like they could still somehow bring some value to Google. Anyway, all the scientists got excited about this, and I was asking in this cafe, this former scientist, but why? Why did they want to break away? And he said, well, isn't it obvious? They wanted to build AGI, but they didn't want Google to control that because that could be dangerous. That whoever had oversight of AGI needed to have, humanity's best interests at heart. And the founders didn't believe that Google was the right organization for that. So the idea was they would spin out, become something like an NGO, and they would have a board of directors who had legal authority and legal control over AGI when they eventually built it. So I wrote it, I did a lot of digging, spoke to a lot of people. DeepMind is so secretive. You're in PR, so you know how this game works. I think I reached out to something like 70 or 80 people, and only like half a dozen were willing to actually talk to me about this. But eventually it was enough. We had enough sources to confirm that this whole project had happened. And not only had it had happened, but Google also shut it down. So after all those negotiations with Larry Page and all the hopes of the scientists, oh, we're going to be independent, we're not working for a big ad giant anymore, they got the news a couple years after I had that conversation with the scientist. The negotiations are over. DeepMind is going to be sucked in even more tightly into Google's control. We're even going to be renamed Google DeepMind. It's no longer just DeepMind.
I was going to say the clue is in the name.
The clue is in the name.
Google DeepMind.
Although actually that renaming happened a little bit after they were told, but it was just reflective of what Google, I think it was Google essentially realized how important AI was to their business and how crazy this idea was of letting them go. But in my mind, when ChatGPT came out 2 years ago, I remembered that conversation and all that reporting for the Wall Street Journal. I thought, there's a real problem here. Even the builders of this technology are worried about who controls it, and they're worried about the oversight, and even they can't get it right. So I thought it was important to write about their noble efforts, the utopian dreams, but how they also got steered off course when they aligned themselves so tightly to these huge companies.
And let's touch on OpenAI, and I'm sure we want to talk, and everyone will be conscious of the Sam Altman sacking and then rehiring that happened about 18 months ago. Right. I mean, despite its name, OpenAI is really a ski on a Microsoft, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think Microsoft is able to take up to 49% equity in OpenAI. And it gets a cut of the revenues. OpenAI gets a cut of the there's like a revenue share agreement. But ultimately, OpenAI, I don't know if it would still be going if it hadn't taken that initial £1 billion investment, or $1 billion investment from Microsoft, which eventually turned into $13 billion in investment from Microsoft to build their foundation models. So yes, I've sometimes referred to them almost as a product arm of Microsoft, in much the same way that DeepMind is a product, well, it's a research arm of Google.
So more generally, where have we got to today? Where is AI today? And also the thesis of your name, Supremacy, is like that film Highlander, there can be only one. First of all, where are we today, and how do you justify that sense that there can only be one?
Well, luckily no one's trying to cut anyone else's head off yet, as they did in Highlander. But I think right now we're in a really interesting moment. If you'd asked me that question a month and a half ago, I'd give you a very different answer. But it looked for a while like...
Give us both answers.
Okay, a month and a half ago,
do something that AI can't do.
Okay. No, we all have to do that now, don't we? A month and a half ago, me would say we're moving into this direction where there's this really strong consolidation of power and knowledge and talent and wealth in the field of AI, just around a few companies, namely Microsoft and Google, aka OpenAI and DeepMind, because those are the companies making the most popular foundation models. They're the ones who have the most money, the access to the NVIDIA chips, which you need to build the AI. And it's not like, so I've talked to some technologists about this who are like, oh, it's not that bad. It's a 6-horse race. It's a 5. I don't think so. It really has been like a 2-horse race in a lot of ways. With maybe Anthropic, maybe a 3-horse race, Anthropic with Amazon coming up, which means that these are the companies that are steering these language models that are not only being plugged into our business infrastructure, our critical, not yet critical infrastructure, sorry, our business infrastructure and personal lives, and we're not there yet, but potentially kind of steering, our culture in some ways, in the same way that social media did, because people talk to language models and they get advice from them. And there was just as a little example, I think someone FOIA did a Freedom of Information Act request for a government minister here. I can't remember the minister's name, but and he. I'm
sure someone in the room will remember this.
Yeah, but they got access to his conversations with ChatGPT, and I don't know the extent to which it was actually guiding this politician on policy.
When should I hold the general election? Oh, July. That's
yeah,
right.
I know. Yeah. Shall we have a Brexit?
So that's what went wrong.
Yeah. Just blame the chatbot. But yeah, I think these are the power of these companies is only growing. It's only growing. The power and their influence is only growing. Okay, now here's my answer today. There is a real question about how much that consolidation of power will be disrupted by 1, open source AI, and 2, AI companies from China. And DeepSeek really, I think, was just like, people were already talking about it before, but for the rest of us in the mainstream audience, people started to realize when DeepSeek came out that the gap really is closing. It was already starting to, the Chinese large language model developers were getting better and better and better. Over the last 10 months, they've been getting better and better and better, like very quickly. And then DeepSeek was just like the moment where everyone realized, wow, this is better than ChatGPT, the latest version of ChatGPT, and it's at the top of the App Store for the iPhone and Android phones. Like, people are actually using it. I was talking to some teenagers. I did a talk in a secondary school, and they were like 17, 18-year-olds, and I said, what kind of models are you guys, what AI models are you guys using? And they said DeepSeek. It's like, teenagers are using DeepSeek.
But let me just, and we spoke last week, but as a cynical old bugger,
yeah.
I shouldn't DeepSeek, isn't there a risk that DeepSeek should really be renamed Deepfake? I just have a suspicion it's one of the largest, or if not the largest, data heist in history, because I don't believe they could have created a large language model for $50 million.
Yes, I think, but even if you account for the possibility that they got access to more NVIDIA chips through Singapore, like that's how they got around the restrictions, which is what some reports have said, or that they're stealing some of the data. I mean, first of all, like, I think a lot of Silicon Valley companies have been stealing quite a bit of data from the rest of us for quite a long time. And second of all, even if you account for that, it still would be a fraction of what the other foundation for what the likes of OpenAI and DeepMind have invested into building foundation models. There's another, just today, there was a news report in Bloomberg News about Ant Group. This is a small story, it's not a big story, but it's Jack Ma's backed group, and they just came up, they've built AI chips that can, do inference and training for AI models much more cheaply than NVIDIA chips can. So, all these constraints that have been put on China in this counterintuitive way have bred quite a bit of innovation. Like, the developers and technologists have to find a way around those limitations. And so they've made AI models that are more efficient, and they're making chips that are more efficient. They are absolutely moving towards a place of complete self-sufficiency where they can build their own AI models without having to get the H800s or whatever the latest chip is from NVIDIA. They can build it themselves. They can get it from their own chip makers.
Well, that's terrifying. But no, we've been talking about the people and as well as the issues, but no conversation about AI could be complete without just discussing briefly the great disruptor, the one that everyone these days goes boo hiss when he comes on stage, Elon Musk, who's been there or thereabouts in all of this. Force for good or force for evil?
Well, first of all, I want to address your last point, which was this is terrifying about what's happening in China. And I understand why it's terrifying, but I don't entirely agree that it needs to be terrifying, because in a lot of ways, I think it's very healthy to have a more dynamic market where it's not just the same incumbents who are getting bigger and they are the guaranteed winners every single time. Now we have, and I think this should give a lot of inspiration to developers in Europe and in the UK that yes, you can innovate without having loads of resources and billions of dollars. You can build AI that's as comparable with what's coming out of Silicon Valley. And just one quick anecdote, I think there's been a lot of hubris among the tech companies in Silicon Valley that have stopped them from even realizing this is possible. And one example is, I know an entrepreneur who was in a private dinner with the CEO of Anthropic, and someone asked him, what's your moat as a foundation? Like, how are you're making foundation models, so what differentiates you from all the others? And his answer was, my moat is that nobody else can raise $4 billion from the likes of Google and Amazon, which is shocking to me that was his answer. That's incredibly short-sighted, that nobody else can raise the amount of money that I can raise. Money is their moat, not technical ingenuity or anything. Obviously, Anthropic does an incredible job with the models they make, but I think that kind of put blinders on them to the possibilities that other developers could do the opposite. So to Elon Musk now.
Let's talk about Elon.
Let's
Come
go
on,
there.
Okay. I think what do you call him in the book? Notoriously unreliable, I think was the phrase.
Okay. I'm sure he likes that.
You won't be getting the interview anytime soon.
No, I don't think so. Well, I think two things can be true at the same time.
Elon Musk is an incredibly irresponsible, erratic, terrible person in a lot of ways. But also, he's right in some areas. He was right to criticize OpenAI for going back on its founding principles of being a nonprofit. Although I think it's very self-serving what he ended up doing, which was trying to sue OpenAI over that. But I think, and he's also right to be worried about the risks that AI poses. He takes it a little bit far. Elon Musk is really worried about the existential risk to human civilization by AI. And he's talked about that quite a lot. But he does that paradoxical thing that a lot of tech leaders do, which is AI could kill us all, so that's why I'm gonna build AI and build the safe one, build the best one, because we don't want China doing it. Can't have China. But if we do it in the democratic Western world, then it will be fine, which doesn't make really any sense at all. We're all humans, right? This is what it boils down to. But no, Elon Musk absolutely had a hand in all of this. He was one of the first investors. He was an early investor in DeepMind. And one of the things I found out from researching my book was that he tried to buy DeepMind at one point with Tesla stock, and the founders said no. But Elon did quite well when DeepMind sold to Google. He got a return from that. But then Elon, I think for him, money isn't everything. He genuinely seemed to have this is a concern he's had for years about the risk of AI. He didn't like the fact that DeepMind was so far ahead in this the step towards building AGI, and that was all being potentially controlled by Google. He thought there should be a counterweight. And so that's why he had these discussions with Sam Altman about building OpenAI so that there could be a competitor to that. Which is, again, I don't disagree with that. I think that was probably a good thing to do.
I think he even made an offer to buy OpenAI last month, didn't he? Or there was, by Twitter or by X, as you.
Yeah, I don't. Was there another attempt? There definitely was an attempt previously to buy OpenAI, again using Tesla stock, and the founders said no. Which probably, I think when people reject the advances of Musk, that doesn't do them any favors personally. I think he takes that personally as well.
Absolutely,
not surprisingly.
We spent a lot of time on the people, but let's come on to AI, because the second half of the book is much more focused on AI force for good, or harbinger of the apocalypse. So let me ask you that question: is AI or AGI a force for good or a harbinger of the apocalypse?
Well, I think I'm going to give you the really boring answer, which is it could be either one. I don't think it's a harbinger of the apocalypse. I think that has been overblown somewhat. Particularly in the year after ChatGPT came out, there was a lot of news reports that talked, with images of the Terminator, and certain thinkers in AI who were AI doomers were given, like Eliezer Yudkowsky had a big piece in Time magazine where he talked about how we've got to stop building AI because we're all going to die if this keeps going. Which I think is a little bit overblown, but it resonates with people because that's clear. That's a clear understanding of what AI could do. AI gets smarter, we all die. I get that in my head. Whereas other things that are a little bit more nuanced are harder to grasp, like, AI language models can be trained on biased data. So they might entrench certain stereotypes about women or ethnic minorities or older people or disabled people, and that has absolutely been proven out by scientific studies. But I think it's very hard for regular people to grasp that as a danger. Also, the fact that these AI models make mistakes. They make a lot of mistakes. But people with technology have a tendency to trust the computer. And what I've noticed just in talking to people who use these things is this is what I'm concerned about, is that people over-rely on AI. They become dependent on it. And so I talked to a scientist once who was studying how Metropolitan Police use face recognition. And he was in a van once, and he watched the police watching just people walk past outside the van on Leicester Square. And when the face recognition tool popped up, they would just assume, oh, it's right, it's automatically right, and they would go and they would like apprehend the person, even when it was wrong. And they were less inclined to check that it might be wrong and assume that it was correct. And this is what we're seeing, like in talking to young people who use AI models, you know, when they're doing their first jobs, for example, as young professionals, there's also a tendency to just trust what the AI is telling you. And I think it's very hard to kind of instill, to change that, because what needs to happen, I think, is we're a lot more skeptical about what AI is telling us, and we're defensive in how we use it. You know, like with defensive driving, you have to be defensive in how you use AI and just assume it's incorrect.
This, and as ever, you've segued beautifully into my next question, which is, I was fascinated. I'd heard about this concept of singularity before, but you explained it, like so many things in the book, really clearly. This is the point at which, according to some theories, we will merge with the machines and become, a single race of, super cyber humans. Apparently, and put this in your diary, by 2030. Are you a believer in the singularity? Because I know in this rarefied group, it's a pretty common belief, isn't it?
Yeah, do you know what? Honestly, I have not given it that much thought, which sounds crazy, but and I've also, my answer is I don't know, and I don't even know if AGI is gonna really happen, because as we were saying in the beginning, the word AI has been just stretched and broadened and overused and misused, that I can imagine companies at some point will be falling over themselves to say, well, we've reached AGI. No, we've reached AGI, but there's no actual commonly accepted wisdom, or just no commonly accepted definition of what AGI is. So one person will claim it, and there will probably be some big argument or big controversy or disagreement over whether it's true, and then someone else will claim it. And it will just become sort of a marketing term, perhaps, as well. I don't know if the singular, I'm a massive science fiction nerd. I love science fiction, and I'm reading a book at the moment about a guy who cryonically freezes himself, and then he wakes up in 110 years, and his brain has been downloaded into a computer. And so he is now a computer, but he still has his sense of self and everything else. And it's fascinating to consider just like existentially what that could mean for us. And again, it sounds like science fiction, but I kid you not, the people who are building AI at OpenAI and DeepMind believe in this stuff. Sam Altman has signed up with a company that will, or he's signed up with a company to be cryonically frozen, as has Peter Thiel and many others. But he's also talked openly about mind uploading, about having his mind uploaded to the cloud. And there are other thinkers in this space who've talked about entirely new beings being created, So there's us as physical human beings, but there will also be digital beings that we have to consider. And that's and we should continue building AI because of all those beings who will continue to be alive in the future, billions and trillions of them, and that's the whole idea behind long-termism. But we won't go into that.
It all hits a snag if National Grid is responsible for supplying the power, because then everything will be wiped by 11 a.m. Yes. A couple more before I open it out to questions. In the here and now, and you and I, as I say, talked last week, the threat to jobs, and you see there's a real and imminent threat to, particularly you mentioned interestingly, graduate jobs. Do you see that in the here and now?
Yes, I do. When I think about jobs, and I don't know how big a threat it's going to be, but certainly the people who are most vulnerable to disruption, to job disruption by AI are people who are entering the workforce right now. And the reason I think that is that when I talk to companies who are using AI, they are using it for tasks that they would normally give to young people who have just joined their company, like interns or entry-level workers. So for example, I was talking to a hedge fund, Man Group, a while ago, and they are using large language models to generate summaries of market data for their portfolio analysts, these pithy market summaries, and that's what their junior analysts normally do. So when you ask them, well, what do the junior analysts do? They say they're doing higher level work because the AI is doing that grunt work. And it's funny, the term grunt work sounds bad. Like, oh, of course, you don't want a human to do grunt work because let's just give that to a computer. But I think we have to be careful about just assuming that grunt work isn't actually potentially a valuable training opportunity for people. Because I was talking to a young person who just joined a fintech firm, and he has to help do due diligence on companies as he's trained as an accountant. He's like really young, 22 years old, just really excited to get going into his career in financial and accounting. But 3 years ago, a person in his position would be reading these Moody's reports and balance sheets on company's house, and you'd be reading through all that data and making a decision. And now he gets Claude or ChatGPT to do that work. And so he himself does not have the experience of reading those documents. And I wonder, he's not getting the same training that his seniors are getting. So what does that mean? Is he really well equipped? Does he really understand what he's doing? On the other hand, he told me, well, if I have a question about some financial term that I don't understand, like GAAP versus non-GAAP or whatever, I can ask the AI. And I would feel too ashamed and embarrassed to ask my boss or one of my colleagues. And I can totally relate to that. I remember feeling that way when I started. And I had no one to ask, so I just had to kind of muddle along. So I think on the one hand, young graduates and entry-level workers have that as an advantage, but they're also losing out on the same kind of training that the rest of us, veterans of a certain vintage, experienced. I think there needs to be a real rethinking of that whole, I hate the term pipeline, but the training pipeline for young people as they come into professional services. And here's one more thing on the point of over-reliance. I think because people, when you're young, you're starting off, you don't have experience, and so you don't have confidence in what you're doing necessarily. So you're much more likely to assume that the AI is correct and to rely on it. And I'll give you an example. I was talking to someone from the Institute for the Future of Work who was talking to a creative arts graduate, and they were working for a marketing company. And that person said, well, when I was asking the expert what that conversation was like, he said it was like they were using the language of an addict, this young person, because they were saying things like, I know I shouldn't be using this tool all the time, but I really need it for my work, and
I just do it now and then.
Yeah, exactly, every now and then. And he was he actually said, I don't trust my own ideas anymore. And I don't think anyone over 40 or over 35 would say something like that. But if you're in your early 20s, I feel like you're just a little bit more likely to feel that way when you're working with a tool that seems so competent and so knowledgeable.
That's fascinating and a really good launch pad for a bit of a Q&A session from everyone and the audience. Please, here we are. Let me start with you.
My original publisher is Macmillan in New York, and the picture looks a little different. He uses the same painting of Napoleon, and then just I don't know how they came up with that. I actually don't know if the human who did that used AI, maybe, but it is based on a real painting of Napoleon, and we just wanted to do something that was sort of evoked the idea of supremacy and winning and a king or that kind of thing.
Didn't end that well for him, though, did it? I mean,
I know.
He was only supreme for a relatively short period of time.
I know. So there is more to come on this whole story. Sorry, and your first question about journalism. Yeah, it's really interesting. Actually, at Bloomberg, I think I'm allowed to say this, but we recently got told that we have access to ChatGPT and we're going to get training on how to use it. And at first, I think a lot of people were worried about that because they thought, well, this thing's going to write instead of me. But actually, when ChatGPT first came out, I heard people refer to it as a writing calculator. But I think that's kind of a misnomer with with the trade like journalism. It's more like, again, a research assistant, or and someone else described it to me as a personalized Wikipedia. So it's quite useful when you are doing research to just ask it to give you a briefing. Also, I've used it several times actually. So if I'm looking at an academic paper, it's like 20 pages long, put that into Claude, which is Anthropic's model, and it will summarize it for me. It will give me briefing points. So I'm missing out on reading an entire academic paper, but I'm also saving time that I could use maybe interviewing the authors of that paper. So I guess my concern is the publications that are using AI to generate stories. We have seen examples of that. And I mean, I don't know, maybe if it helps local news, because local news has actually really been eroded, particularly in the United States, that's a good thing. But I personally feel as a columnist, my job is more vulnerable to being replaced than a reporter, because AI can just spit out, it can just pontificate on whatever topic very easily. Whereas a reporter, you expect them to go out and interview people and tell stories and get color on the scene, and AI can't do that, not yet anyway. So actually one thing I've tried to do differently in the last 2 years is pick up the phone a lot more, call people, try and tell personal stories, because AI can't do that, not yet. I think that's a great point. I don't know that it would be their downfall, because they are so well resourced and their coffers are just enormous. And it would be the downfall of OpenAI, but not Google, not Amazon, and not Microsoft, because they've got huge cloud businesses, they've got advertising businesses, they've got the search business and YouTube and everything else. But OpenAI, their business is building a foundation model. And remember that anecdote I said about the guy who said, our moat is the money that we raised? Well, actually, yeah, I completely agree with you. The problem, it is becoming commoditized to build these foundation models, to build the plumbing of AI today. And if you talk to people who are building AI services on top of those models, they'll say it's actually very easy to switch between them. They're not sticky like cloud services are, and that is a problem for the foundation model makers like Google, like OpenAI. So actually, in a way, I think it could certainly be that that becomes more commoditized. And what I would hope is that we start to see a real dynamic market sit on top of all that. So a year and a half ago, it was almost derogatory to call a startup who is building on top of a foundation model a wrapper. That's the phrase that's used. Perplexity, if you've heard of Perplexity, which is one of the most successful AI companies right now, is a wrapper. They didn't build their own foundation model. They built on top of Claude and GPT-4 and Gemini. But they built a really good service on top of it that people like and they pay for. And I think their latest news is they're going to raise another $1 billion at an $18 billion valuation or something like that. They've got revenue coming up to $100 million a year. The mistake that these companies made, like OpenAI and Google with Gemini, is they got so obsessed with having the biggest model, the biggest cluster of GPUs. And they didn't actually think about building well-designed products that businesses and consumers would want to use. That's one reason why I think businesses have struggled a little bit to integrate AI into their services to measure return on investment and all that. They need a lot more hand-holding. And so you've got companies like Perplexity coming in, building these wrappers on top, and yeah, I hope that's the direction that things go. I hope there isn't this, Google and Microsoft just own everything forever and that's it. I think it would be nice to see that they're just building the network infrastructure, kind of like the days of the dot-com boom. You build the network infrastructure, then people build websites and apps on top of that, and that's what we're starting to see now.
And the smartphone. Apple took over smartphone, but then loads of companies created apps and created an ecosystem. Yeah. Roddy.
I would like to just make a distinction about the startup ecosystem here in the UK. It's actually a thriving ecosystem from the view of venture capital investment that goes into startups up until Series B. So, or maybe even up to Series A. I need to look closely at the numbers, but like the seed market, for seed funding, you're golden in this city. You can get whatever you need to start your company. If you want to scale up, that's a different story. And I know there have been efforts on the part of the UK government to get more pension funds investing with this Mansion House initiative, but that's apparently really slowly getting off the ground. So I think the intention is there, but it's just not moving forward enough. I don't know that, and I don't know if this was what you were, if you had views on regulation, if you feel that European and UK regulation are holding back local businesses or not, no? Yeah, absolutely. So I think there needs to be absolutely more scale-up funding to create the kind of self-sufficiency we're seeing out of China, quite frankly. The UK's AI action plan that Keir Starmer announced a few weeks ago, it was 50 points. It was like a list of 50 things. That's like a really long list. Who has a to-do list with 50 things on it? If you do that, you're not going to get them all done because it's too long. So I think it would have honestly been more effective to have just focused on 2 or 3 or 4 things like creating data centers or supercomputers. I think we have to see where things go now. I think there is what's happening in the US, what we're seeing out of China, hopefully is lighting a fire a little bit. And obviously there's interest from the UK government to try and cultivate an even stronger ecosystem. So I think we have to see how that plays out. But it's having written about tech for the last 20 years, I've always been quite sad to see British companies sell to companies. I remember meeting the guy who started TweetDeck a long time ago. He had these great ambitions. Oh, we're going to be a social media hub. It's not just going to be for Twitter. We'll have Facebook on there. And I just thought, this is great. This is going to be a great company. And then a few weeks later, he sold to Twitter. I was like, oh, come on, man. Like, just stay in the game a little longer. There's all sorts of other reasons for why that is. Another issue, I think, is startup founders here in the UK don't jump back into the ecosystem. They tend to go off into their villa in Spain or in the UK and just retire early, whereas actually in Silicon Valley, there's much more of a culture of when you sell your company, you jump back in, you become an angel investor, you start another one, you become a serial entrepreneur. And I just don't see that as much over here. So to even talk about how do you change a culture, I don't know how that happens. But on the other hand, I would just like to say, people often say, how can we create another Microsoft here in the UK? How can we create? I don't think we need a Microsoft in the UK. I think the fact that the companies in Silicon Valley have grown to have multi-trillion-dollar valuations is kind of an abomination. They have monopolized a lot of the industries that they're in. Look at how Amazon has acted. Antitrust officials, regulators in the US have not kind of robustly scrutinized and dealt with those companies in the way that they should have. So no, I think it's, and they imitate, they're not necessarily innovators, they're imitators. Look at how Meta and Facebook have acted over the years, and Amazon too. So I think what we have here is a fantastic ecosystem. It just needs more time. And I think we should stop with the obsession of trying to create, these huge giant squids that kind of suck all the oxygen out of the room like these giant tech companies do in the US.
We've got time for one more question. Ian.
Parmy, great book. Congratulations on it.
Thank you.
A couple of them.
Oh my goodness, that's a hard question. On Anthropic, that's a really fascinating question because they have deliberately taken money from 2 different tech companies to try to avoid, getting too close to any one of them. So they've taken money from Amazon and from Google, but most of the funding has come from Amazon. So when people talk about Anthropic, they talk about it as being, part of Amazon. It's basically Amazon's AI play. I think it would be really interesting to see if foundation models do continue to be very commoditized. They struggle to make money. They need to take more investment from Amazon. Who's the most obvious buyer for Anthropic? It would be Amazon, right? And we've seen some very, very promising AI companies in Silicon Valley last year, not Anthropic, but they had names like Inflection, Adept, Character AI, and they were all acqui-hired by larger tech companies, by Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Adept went to Amazon. So there's real interest in picking up startups, and it would be a real jewel in the crown for Amazon to buy Anthropic, which I don't think they would be able to do under current antitrust regulations. They wouldn't, well, who knows actually with Trump in power.
I was going to say, all bets are off on that.
Oh, I've heard very different things about how the DOJ is going to be approaching deals right now. So I think it's kind of an open question, but they could always do the acqui-hire thing, and that's how they get around the antitrust scrutiny.
Melania Trump, remember, has got a $24 million advance from Amazon.
That's right. Was it Amazon Prime or something?
And that's exactly, and that's because it was totally in their commercial interest.
Yeah.
In every sense.
Yeah, they're not acting for the benefit of humanity like Sam and Demis were, right? I'm sorry, Ian, what was the other part
Government
of the question?
advisor.
Oh, yeah, what would I buy that? So I think UK is in a really great position. Exactly as you mentioned, they're kind of midway between the kind of, some would say oppressive regulations of the EU and almost nothing coming out of the US under Trump just got rid of the AI Safety Institute. They got rid of it, which shocked me because Elon Musk is like massively afraid of AI. You would think that he'd be whispering in Trump's ear like, maybe we should, but it's his own people, Doge, that got rid of it. So that's strange. I think the UK does tech regulation really well. A lot of people don't like the Online Safety Act. I thought it was actually a really great piece of legislation. I think it was very sensibly designed. Some of the other tech policy that the UK has come out with around data privacy and data protection for children, it works really, really well. It's even been copied in the United States by some states. And I've heard also that in Whitehall now at DCIT, there is the AI Safety Institute is still there, and there's about 150 people working on AI safety in Whitehall right now, which is more than the number of people working on that in Brussels. So I think we have, and it shouldn't really surprise us because, look who's just around the corner in this same city is DeepMind. Some of the greatest minds in AI are right here. Just around that, around that corner there. With their drones, who knows. So I think there's a lot of potential here to do regulation really well. And and again, sorry, don't quote me on this, but I've spoken to someone quite senior at Whitehall about whether the UK would put out its own AI regulation legislation, and that person said yes, that it was coming, because there is some discomfort at number 10 about just going along with what the EU brings out with its own AI Act. So I think the UK is very well positioned, just to say it quickly, to regulate AI and to do it sensibly. And I hope that the UK does that. I sense from Keir Starmer that he doesn't want to kind of position himself as the cop on AI. Which is really different to how Rishi Sunak was. Rishi was like, oh, we've got to do AI safely, and he started the AI safety summits that carried on. Here is all like growth, oh, we must use AI for growth and everything else. But I think it would be a real disservice to us as a country and to the world, because the UK does it so well. They do tech regulation so well. So I hope they step up in that regard.
On that positive note, first of all, again, in terms of book club, there is a present from us to you. There is a copy of Supremacy at the back. Parmy is going to stay here for a bit and answer your questions. If you're, like those people putting their questions into a machine, you're too embarrassed to ask in public, you can come and ask her privately afterwards. And of course, as I say, have your book signed. There is lunch waiting. I've got lots of people to thank. Well, maybe just a few. First of all, Freddie Barber, standing over there, whose idea it was to have this session in the first place. Fantastic, Freddie. Keep those ideas coming. This has been a great session. Jess and the whole team from Havas for organising the event so flawlessly and ensuring it all works, which is, as we know, machines don't always work. And events don't always work either, but it's great when they do. And lastly, and most of all, Parmy, thank you for coming to Book Club. It's been fantastic, fascinating. As I suspected, there's a huge amount more to talk about. But come back when you've done your next edition, with your section on China, please.
Yeah, I will be happy to do that. Thank you so much for having me.